Okay, so today I want to do something a little bit different. This video is about political strategy, which is a very conflictual topic, but that's a good thing. You're very welcome to share your perspective in the comment section, but I'll kindly ask you to first consider the points I'm making and not jump to conclusions before I fully develop my argument. I was motivated to make this considering some of the recent discourse in left-wing circles, especially after all the elections that we went through last year. I've had some strong reactions at times, not gonna lie, but I really took my time to write this video to make sure my arguments are based on data, on science, on my humble experience, and not on drama. Ultimately, my goal is that the left becomes stronger, and to do so, we need to have the best strategy possible, so here's my take on it. Before I start this video, I want to give you a little bit of context as to who I am and why I think my opinion on this matters. My name is Alice, I'm French. I grew up in the north of France, an area that flourished during the Industrial Revolution with the textile industry and the coal industry, but later suffered from deindustrialization and became one of the poorest areas in France. Poor but proud is the motto of the town my dad grew up in. When I was 2, my parents moved out of Lille to go to French Flanders to get closer to nature. I spent more than 20 years of my life in the countryside and go back frequently. My mom was quite involved politically. She also volunteered at a local refugee camp as a nurse. In French Flanders, we have a few of them for refugees traveling to Calais and then to the UK. I liked to join her every now and then because I could practice the English that I had learned in my books with the refugees. People in the area didn't really like the refugee camps. Some of my relatives weren't big fans. In fact, my mom and my other relatives are on completely opposite ends of the political spectrum. I think that growing up with them has taught me a lot about the psychology of the far-right vote. It helps me answer questions like, are far-right voters inherently racist? Are they just frustrated? Aren't far-right voters ashamed? Or are they just dumb? That attachment to my far-right relatives and my background has also made me very skeptical of all the things we hear about morality, far-right voters, etc. I think my area is especially interesting to study if we want to understand the rise of the far-right. In fact, it's known in France as the lab of the far-right. It's in the northern coal mine areas that the French far-right, the National Rally, won its first municipality in 2014. That's where the vote went from left to far-right. The coal mines were predominantly socialist to communist. Up north, in Flanders, a conservative area, the vote went from right-wing to far-right. Almost all our representatives in the north are from the National Rally. This phenomenon happens in my area, it happens in France, in Europe, in the US, in a lot of globalized neoliberal countries. So now that you understand my perspective, I want to debunk or nuance a thing we hear a lot when talking about politics. That thing is that people who live outside city centers are a bunch of depressed, uneducated racists. I want to change your perspective on that, and once that is done, I'll explain you why that leads me to defend wokism. This idea of the depressed, uneducated racists versus the enlightened, urban progressives is everywhere. On TV, on social media.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right?
It is also confirmed by the maps we see after elections. Look at this one, for example, in the US, or this one in France, also this one in Italy. The little dots that you see are often cities lost in a sea of red or black or blue, depending on the map. So this is a territorial approach of politics. Journalists love it because it's very visual, it's very binary. That's why we see those maps all the time. In fact, we see them so much that we've fully integrated them in the way we do and talk about politics. On the left side of the political spectrum, we're very uncomfortable with those maps. We don't want to be perceived as some sort of detached urban hipsters. We don't want to be a little dot in an ocean of depressed, uneducated racists. This anxiety has pushed some left-wing commentators and politicians to change their strategy to talk to that sea of far-right voters. In France, for example, we hear left-wing politicians appeal to French patriots, the meat eaters and the cheese lovers. The sausage was at the heart of communist leader Fabien Roussel's campaign.
Non, Fabien, tu ne gagneras pas avec un steak!
Great source of memes, this guy. Some other left-wing politicians do everything they can to avoid talking about the topics that make the rural voters angry. The Middle East, feminism, trans people, Arabs, POC. But is that a good strategy? Should we appeal to those voters in the first place? Who are the depressed, uneducated racists that everyone talks about? Are they really depressed? Are they really uneducated? And are they really racist? So we're going to take each word separately. Let's start with depressed. We often hear that people living outside city centers, in rural areas, are the losers of globalization. They've been left behind and are now frustrated. Well, that's a very biased view of reality, one that projects the belief of urban people onto rural people. Urban people tend to believe that their lifestyle is the best and that everyone craves it. On the contrary, many rural people don't understand why someone would pay an extortionate amount of money to live in a box in a crowded city. A lot of people in the countryside actually enjoy living there all year round. They have a special connection to nature, plenty of space, and a strong sense of community because of how stable everything is. Now, don't get me wrong, some rural areas are struggling because younger generations are leaving, which causes a lot of worry. But that is not the situation everywhere. And even in challenging situations with public services disappearing, schools closing, etc., rural people take pride in figuring things out with the help of locals. Sociologists explain that resilience, personal responsibility, and small solidarities are very strong in rural areas. The assumption that the red and black parts on the election maps are full of depressed people who feel left behind and angry isn't entirely accurate. Now let's move on to the next word, uneducated. We often hear that the left has lost the working class vote, implying that the rise of the far right is the result of votes shifting from the left to the right. This has happened to some degree, such as in formal industrial areas like the coal mines, but it's not the whole picture. In fact, I would argue that it's not even the main driver. Looking at recent elections in France and similar trends appear in other globalized countries, sociologist Vincent Tiberge observed two things. First, there's a sense of resignation among two groups, the working class and young people. Second, there's an increased engagement from one specific group, older conservative voters. To put it simply, working class people don't vote that much. But yeah, those who vote are shifting more and more towards the far right. This can be explained by two reasons. The first one is that they put religion or identity over class. Trump, for example, largely won the white evangelical working class vote, but lost among other working class groups, except white men. Harris won the other groups, but it is true that the Democrats aren't doing much to engage more voters. That's why the working class don't really vote. They don't feel represented by any party. The second reason why working class people went from the left to the right, and that's more from my personal experience talking with former communists, is because they really believe what the media says regarding migrants taking over their and their children's jobs. But anyway, all I wanted to say here is that the hyper-focus on the working class can prevent us from looking at the real threat here. The major boost for the far right comes from increased engagement among groups that used to vote for right-wing parties. These include conservative voters and an increased number of young men who previously leaned center-right. Neither group is necessarily working class. The young men may have attended college, and the boomers, even though they don't have a college degree, have accumulated some economic capital. Different social classes vote for the far right. Sociologist Benoît Coquart notes that imitation is powerful in rural areas where communities and hierarchies are stable. Influence can flow through family businesses, service provider interactions, or casual spaces like pubs or sports clubs. A decade ago, the imitation vote in these areas leaned right-wing. Now it's increasingly far-right. It was taboo just a few years ago to admit voting for the far-right. It was considered un-Republican and serious. Now it's more socially acceptable. So are people voting for the far-right because they're dumb or uneducated, as we often hear in liberal media? Well, no. The far-right has been normalized, sure, but that doesn't mean its supporters are brainless puppets with zero agency. From my personal experience, living, debating, and canvassing in the lab of the far-right for years, I can tell you that even when we debunk the far-right lies or expose the absurdity of their representative statements, most of the people we talk to, still want to vote for the national rally. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but that's the hard truth. You have to trust me on this. I've had up-close personal experience with this over more than a decade. I've seen people supporting the far right despite major changes in their political agenda, from pro-social to pro-business, from anti-Europe to pro-Europe. The only thing that remains stable throughout those changes is anti-immigration. They are not tricked into voting for a racist candidate. I've had many debates and fights that led to this conclusion. They know what they're doing. More and more people are doing the same thing. The Overton window is shifting, racism is becoming acceptable. They can be racist and remain respectable people. That's a smooth transition onto the last word, racist. Let us ask ourselves that question once again. If people vote for the far right's program, even after we explain its inherent racism, does that mean that they're all racists? Some leftists will say that voters aren't racist, but that they are misplacing their frustrations. They'll say something like,
our societies have never been so tolerant. Sure, you'll hear racist takes here and there, but those can be corrected.
Now, it is true that our societies are increasingly tolerant. This is measured in surveys asking people their views on gay marriage, abortion, and other identity-related issues. Even the far right has become more tolerant in its quest to appear more media-friendly. I made an entire video explaining how they try to appeal to gay men and women. The far right is unquestionably hostile towards LGBTQ+ people, women's rights, and people of color, but they talk to them by adapting their us versus them framework to fit their fears. So they tell women and gay people that they will protect them by getting rid of archaic and dangerous migrants. They tell POC that they want to penalize the welfare queens and Islamists, not the hardworking, assimilated POC. Now, the fact that they have to do all that fake progressivism is proof that they're met with resistance. Sure, more and more people are embracing racist discourses. The resistance is not strong enough, and I'll explain why in a second. But it's important to note that there is still some resistance. Now, where does that resistance come from? Well, let me go back to where I started, with my experience of rurality. I grew up in the countryside with parents who didn't have a degree, who kept me and my sister curious, but didn't give us the tools to think like I think today. I didn't know much about political science, sociology, philosophy until quite recently. I was, like most good students in my area, pushed towards engineering, medicine, or law. Then I randomly stumbled upon commentary and video essays, and I loved it. It allowed me to understand politics, something I've always loved, in a completely different way. I also changed degree from law to English studies, so that can lead me more into the humanities. But yeah, I learned so much, mostly through online resources, books, lectures, all sorts of educational content. All of that allowed me to bring contradiction in conversations where only one side was shown. I've had countless debates with people who had classist, anti-feminist, racist, or transphobic takes, and I was happy to be in those conversations to bring nuance and challenge people's preconceived beliefs. I know what I do isn't revolutionary, but this is what I mean by resistance. The reason why society remains tolerant, the reason why the far right has to appear progressive, is because there are people like me, the wokes, equipped with their toolbox, bringing contradiction, educating people. We help mitigate the rise of the far right by humanizing what people hear in the media. But we can't resist by ourselves. After decades of neoliberalism, rural areas have been stripped of public services, unions, associations, namely places that typically encourage humanism and communality. We continue to resist at an interpersonal level, but gosh, it's hard. We have very little ways of connecting to each other. Like, I can't help but think about my mother when I have those conversations, because she fought for a decade to keep humanist values alive in our area, almost entirely by herself. And she's exhausted now. Correcting individuals' sexist, racist, homophobic, classist, etc. views is tiring, and it cannot properly work if there isn't any law, policy, or programs supporting those changes. So while our societies are generally becoming more tolerant, tolerance alone doesn't stop fascism. When people feel threatened, tolerance quickly evaporates. Far-right politicians prey on this. They basically say to their voters, hey, we won't be able to change your life for the better because that's just how things are, but you are resilient, you're hardworking, not like those welfare queens and snowflakes complaining all the time. In fact, you know what? We can promise you one thing. Your life probably won't get better. But you can rest assured that all the migrants, Black and Arabs, LGBTQ+ weirdos, all those people, they will suffer more than you. You'll remain above them. This really taps into people's worst instincts. But it works. Now, I'm not saying that fostering tolerance is not necessary. I'm just saying that it's not the most effective way of fighting racism. It is much more efficient to look at where racism is produced. So where is it produced? Well, in his recent book, sociologist Vincent Tiberge explained that society's move to the far right is driven top-down. Far-right politicians keep yapping about immigration and insecurity, the media capitalizes on the sensationalism, and then progressively shifts their editorial lines to better incorporate those topics in their coverage. Conservative billionaires now buy surveys asking stay-at-home moms and retired people looking for an easy way to make money online. Do you feel safe? No. Is immigration out of control?
Definitely, yeah.
Those surveys are then commented on TV shows by pseudo-experts with books to sell and ex-followers to gain. All that discourse then turns into policies that institutionalize racist practices. So more power to the police to target Black and Arab communities, fewer resources for people in need of assistance, rights taken away from marginalized communities, and weapons to our colonizer friends. That's why the left needs to have a competitive discourse on those issues with bold policies and programs for minorities and for the working class. Okay, so we covered the racism part, we also covered the depressed and uneducated. Looking closely at all those aspects helped me better understand the far-right vote. All the things I've talked about come from my personal on-the-ground experience, as well as the most recent sociological analyses produced on this topic. So no, people voting for the far-right don't necessarily see themselves as losers. They're not all working-class people who went from left to right. Those who dared emerge to the far-right were already on the right side of the political spectrum and have some economic capital. They also happen to be the people who vote the most. So when we look at the scary election maps, that's who we see. As I said earlier, some leftists are getting scarily obsessed with those far-right voters. That leads them to tone down their discourse on racism and the police. They ask us to stop using words like intersectionality, feminism, or gender because it will scare away potential voters. Their strategy is very simple. Shut the woke's mouth up. That is such a depressing view of left-wing politics. When did woke become a weakness? I don't want to get too philosophical in this video, but the word woke has such an interesting history. One of the first known uses of woke in a social and political sense came in 1938 in a song by blues musician Eddie Ledbetter, better known as Lead Belly. The song, Scottsboro Boys, was about the wrongful convictions of 9 Black teenagers in Alabama. In it, Lead Belly urges people to stay woke as a warning to stay alert to racial injustices. Its use became more widespread during the civil rights movement and re-emerged prominently in the 2010s with the rise of Black Lives Matter, symbolizing awareness of systemic racism and social inequalities. It's only recently that woke became a bad thing. And that's because right-wing media decided it was a bad thing. So it really pains me when I see left-wing people use it the same way the right does. It's a form of surrender. It validates the right's criticism. The same applies to feminism, anti-racism, or the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. These terms carry so much history and meaning, but we should stop using them because we don't want to scare people away. That's not what the left does. We don't surrender to right-wing discourse. We stay strong when the establishment tries to divide us. Our job isn't to be media-friendly. Our job is to shift paradigms. Have we forgotten the historical role of the left? Our mission as leftists is to politicize people through education or entertainment. Historically, the left has empowered the working class with the knowledge and structures they need to resist bosses. From the 1960s, feminist, LGBTQ+ activist, and anti-racism movement politicized the personal. They democratized concepts like sexism, racism, and homophobia so that people could politicize their personal experiences of discrimination and organize to fight for a better society. The left empowered people who did not vote to finally play a role in society. Still today, the feminist movement, anti-racism movement, and LGBTQ+ movement bring millions of votes to the left. But now we are told we shouldn't talk about those issues because we scare potential voters away. It's the exact opposite. I feel like the scary maps and binary Twitter discourse are really messing us up. We panic, we think we've lost our influence, we become obsessed with those people who don't vote like us, we want to please them at all costs. As a result, we progressively get away from our mission. We indulge in petty criticism against the wokes, and our opponents love to see that. So let's stick to the mission, which is to politicize through education in the form of activism, infographics, books, essays, video essays, commentary videos, music, films, sports, etc. These materials are especially helpful for people resisting in far-right territories. They've been super helpful to me, a rural science girl turned left-wing influencer. So yeah, this was in defense of wokeism. We first nuanced the stereotypes of the depressed, uneducated racists to better understand the sociology of the reactionary vote, and then we explained that the best resistance strategy isn't to stop using supposedly controversial words, rather we must stay true to our core mission as left-wing people, educating and politicizing. That also means staying strong in the face of the anti-woke backlash and focusing our energy on those who resist, not those who divide. Now to conclude, I want to acknowledge that there are detrimental tendencies on the left side of the political spectrum. I wish we had an easy term for it, but the only phrase we have now is political moralism. That phrase is found in Wendy Brown's essay Moralism as Anti-Politics. More recently, Adrienne Mary Brown also published Loving Corrections. Both connect in the sense that they differentiate between morality and moralism. I said I wouldn't get too philosophical in this video, but I need to do this just for the conclusion. Brown explains that people motivated by morality are powered by good sentiments. They want to make the world a better place. However, people who are motivated by moralism are powered by bad sentiments. In Moralism as Anti-Politics, she says, quote, "It is when the telos of the good vanishes, but the yearning for it remains, that morality appears to devolve into moralism in politics. It is at this point that one finds moralizers standing against much, but for very little, adopting a voice of moral judgment in the absence of a full-fledged moral apparatus and vision." End quote. Basically what she says is that when there is no political vision, no agenda, no bold measures, then we turn to moralizing, meaning policing individuals. She views political moralism as a symptom of a lack of political vision. In other words, if we think that we can't change the system, we're more likely to resort to policing individuals. This is actually another feature of what right-wing media and a certain amount of left-wing people called wokism. The virtue signaling, the performative activism, etc. I don't personally use the term woke. I prefer something like, conscious crusader or hyper hip or virtue god. Tell me your favorite one in the comments. But anyway, this is where things get interesting. Wendy Brown sees moralizing tendencies in another group. She says, quote, "Alternatively, the moralizer refuses the loss of the teleological and becomes reactionary, clinging without logical ground to the last comforting frame in the unraveling narrative: pluralism, the working class, universal values, the movement, standpoint epistemology, a melting pot America, a woman's essential nature, whatever it was that secured the status of the true, the status of the good, and their unbroken relationship." End quote. That little quote is a bit technical, I had to reread it many times, but it basically says something I've always felt but struggled to articulate. That's why I decided to sit down and make this video to find answers. When Brown talks about the moralizers, she doesn't just include the conscious crusaders, hyper hip or virtue gods, you choose which one you prefer. She also includes the anti-woke. She put them in the same basket. Brown says that the wokes and those who criticize the wokes by claiming that we should go back to universalism, to their romanticized view of the good old working class, are actually much more similar than they think. Both groups surrender in the face of adversity. They don't want to work for a bold political vision. They've lost faith in revolutionary ideals. So they turn their energy to hyper-policing for one group, or romanticize nostalgia for the other group. Both do so in a very selfish way. It doesn't come from a place of goodness, it comes from a place of frustration and bitterness. It doesn't help us get closer to our political vision. it actually divides us. I mean, it's okay to have conflicts within the movement. It's okay to focus on one cause more than the other ones. It makes us, as a movement, grow and refine our mission. However, systematically refusing to talk about one or multiple causes, or even devalorize those causes, is profoundly counterproductive. Making fun of wokeism has become the acceptable way of downgrading minorities and their struggles. People who do so on big media platforms want to target liberal elites, the urban hipsters, and show themselves as more down-to-earth, in touch with real people. They don't understand that outside urban spaces, people use words like feminism, queerness, POC, neurodivergent. It's not because the map is black or red or blue that we're not there. We are politicizing people. We are getting more voters. Like my beautician, for example, who recently divorced a dangerously controlling man. She was sharing her story and dropped some feminist terms here and there. I was not expecting this. In 2 years, she'll be campaigning for the left. Trust me, I'm working on it. But yeah, we've seen countless political commentators starting to criticize wokeism, hoping to reach people beyond urban circles, but it doesn't work. The only thing they get is sympathy from those who already don't like wokeism because they don't like social justice. It's good for business, true. Being anti-woke brings a lot of views, etc. But it's not good for the left. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Before I end this video, I would like to thank my Patreons for their support, and a special thank to top tier Patreons: James Tej Supong, Wolf Gratz, Patrick Button, Devish Mohan Mina, Jeff Lee, Yilan, Tayab Matin, Nick, Brandon, James Siddle, Ujwal, Pablo, Patrick, Boris, Ria, Donage, Corrigi, Tristan, Christopher, Ian, Alex, Manuel, Christopher France, and Perry. And thank you to the other ones who prefer to stay anonymous. That's it for me. That's it for today. I'll see you very soon. Salut!